It's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there.
Good evening, everybody. You're watching America First. My name is Nicholas J. Fuentes. We got a great show for you tonight. Very excited to be back here with you tonight on Monday. And we have a lot to talk about, lots to get into. Big show. Our featured story. We're talking all about the war in Iran again, day 24. I'm actually losing track now. It's been going on for so long, it feels like it's been going on for my entire life. And so we're now in week four. Week four, I think. Yeah, day 24. So I guess it was week number 3 finish, on Friday night. And tonight, we got a big development. This is the mother of all tacos. We didn't get a chance to cover this because it was announced on Saturday. But on Saturday, Trump issued to date what might be the most destabilizing ultimatum against Iran. He said on Saturday that if the Strait of Hormuz is not opened in 48 hours, that Trump, Israel, maybe even Saudi Arabia would engage Iran in an all-out attack on Iran's energy infrastructure. Iran said they would retaliate and they would bomb the energy in the Gulf, as well as potentially the desalination in the United Arab Emirates, which would be like the end of the Middle East as we know it. Now picture this. So Trump says this on Saturday afternoon. He says he got 48 hours. If nothing happens, then we're going in really hard and heavy, escalating the energy warfare even further. Like we talked about, Iran says if that happens, it's an energy war. We're going into Qatar, we're going into Saudi Arabia, the Emirates. We're all in as well. Well, then this morning, I think at like 7 a.m., the timing's very critical here. 7:30 a.m. on True Social, Trump comes out and says, you know what? Never mind. We're good. Trump says 7:30 a.m. Monday morning. Mind you, this is half hour before the markets open, half hour before New York Stock Exchange opens. Trump says, never mind. Actually, they have 5 more days. Trump says we have talks going on. We're meeting with Iran behind the scenes. He says we have very powerful, very strong talks. He says, and now we're going to postpone the attacks, not cancel them. He says, but we're going to postpone them by 5 days. And in the meantime, we're going to see if Iran wants to make a deal. So that's going to be our main story. That's going to be our featured story. We're going to talk all about that. And like I said, this is like the mother of all ultimate taco. And I remember over the weekend, I talked about this a little bit in the group chat. I was talking with everybody, I think in a voice message, and people are saying it looks like this might be the end. This might be it. Because again, if Trump goes into Iran and bombs the energy, there's not even that much left that we can hit. If they come back and they attack desalination, they attack LNG, they attack oil, you're talking about a global recession. And this is a recession that we don't come back from for probably years, maybe a decade. So I had a lot of people asking me, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think Trump is going to go all the way? Is he going to do it? And I said this on Telegram. I said, you know, on the one hand, he really can't back down from the threat. We can't give Iran the strategic victory. We can't lose the credibility. We need deterrence right now. At the same time, every single time that Trump makes a threat like this against Russia, against China, even the Democrats, he always backs down. I said, so it seems like basically an impossible situation. On the one hand, you have World War III. On the one hand, you have a total economic collapse. On the other hand, you have the mother of all, Trump always chickens out. And so I know everybody was watching and waiting to see as the hours counted down over the weekend, what is Trump ultimately going to decide? And then this morning, literally buzzer beater at the last minute, Trump comes out and says, you know what, we're good. We're going to push it back by 5 days. And of course, the reason the timing is so conspicuous is because you have to consider the bounds of this entire episode in the conflict. He makes the announcement on a Saturday morning and says you got 48 hours. So in other words, he says this after the markets close on Friday. So that's all done. There's going to be no speculation on oil. There's going to be no speculation on gas. There's going to be no major movement in the market. And then just an hour before the markets open on Monday, he gives the all clear and it's all over. And in the meantime, when all of this is happening, the economy has gained and lost literally trillions of dollars. When he makes the ultimatum, everything crashes. Oil futures, gold, S&P 500, Bitcoin, literally every safe harbor, every market, every asset is in the toilet. Comes back on Monday and says, there's actually a peace deal in the works, one that's very strong, and we're getting it together. And what do you think happens? When the market opens, everything shoots right back up. And this is classic Trump diplomacy. I don't know if this was the case in the first term, in the first administration, but at least in the second administration, it seems that every statement, every action, almost everything that Trump does is a calculated deception to manipulate the stock market, commodities trade, and financial markets. And so we're going to talk all about that tonight. That's going to be our main story. And we're going to get to the bottom of exactly what is going on here. It's a little bit confusing because, like I said, when you consider the timing, it looks like this is some kind of financial manipulation. It seems very obvious that that's what this entire thing was. This was using our leverage over the weekend, and maybe the idea is we could compel Iran into making a deal with a threat like that. In the event that Iran doesn't listen, then we can call it off and we can salvage the markets. So in a word, it looks like that is just a complete farce. When you consider, and not even just the timing of this particular ultimatum, but how the war has been carried out basically every weekend since it started. On the other hand, with that being said, we have to be careful not to say that it's a total farce, because at the same time, there's a lot of reporting that there is a deal in the works behind the scenes. And there was a big spread in the Wall Street Journal, and there was some talk from Axios, from Barak Ravid, which says that there's a handful of Middle Eastern countries that are now getting in the middle of it between the U.S. and Iran as intermediaries. And they're pleading with Washington, and they're trying to leverage Iran also to come to the table and make an agreement for the sake of the entire region. So we're going to unpack that. We're going to address all that. We'll talk about the timing with the financial markets. We'll talk about, to the extent that it's happening, if there is a deal in the works and what either side expects and what that might look like. That'll be our major development. At the same time, and this is, again, going along with the timing of all these announcements, our second part of our Iran coverage tonight, we're going to talk about this force which is being deployed to the Middle East and which is actually growing. So last week it was reported that there is a group of 2,200 Marines on amphibious assault vessels headed for the Persian Gulf. And the type of vessels that they're on and the type of unit that this is, and there are sources from the Pentagon saying this as well, this is the rumor, it looks like Trump is preparing to invade part of Iran, whether that's one of the islands in the Persian Gulf, an island in the Strait of Hormuz, or maybe just a beachhead on Iran's coastline. It looks like Trump is preparing some kind of ground operation in Iran. And this is why they're being a little bit cagey about their rhetoric about the conflict. I said this last week, it's been reported elsewhere. As far as it concerns boots on the ground, they seem to want to have it both ways. And so at once, they're telling people it's not going to be a ground war. It's not going to be boots on the ground. It's not going to be like Iraq. At the same time, however, they're also saying we may do something on the ground. They're saying that it's not going to be Iraq. It's not going to be nation building. We're not going to be engaged in a full-scale, full-spectrum, multi-domain ground conflict like Iraqi freedom. They're saying, however, we do reserve the right and the possibility that we might deploy a narrow and limited ground force, a special force operation, Delta forces, Navy SEALs, Marines, something like that, for a more limited tactical objective. And some of those objectives they floated out are securing Iran's enriched uranium, taking Karg Island, which is the hub for Iran's oil export, taking an island in the Strait of Hormuz so that they can gain control over the strait. Whatever the operation is, they're trying to have it both ways, where they're going to say it's not really boots on the ground, but at the same time, it's a ground operation. There's going to quite literally be American soldiers on the ground in Iran, whether it's on the islands or it's on the mainland. There's going to be boots on the ground. They're just saying it's not going to be 200,000. It's not going to be, like I said, on the scale of Iraq. So to them, the way they're branding it is that this is not a major ground operation. So while you have this ultimatum playing out over the weekend, where Trump is threatening to bomb Iran's energy infrastructure and Iran is threatening to retaliate, and now they're giving Iran this 5-day reprieve, while all of this is playing out in the background, you've got Marines headed to the Persian Gulf. And now, it's just been reported today, Trump is planning to deploy airborne troops. The 82nd Airborne is being moved to the Middle East, being put on high alert. This is a group of 3,000 soldiers, and they're not Marines, they're not amphibious assault units like the ships that are currently en route to the Persian Gulf. But these guys will parachute in. They can go anywhere in the world with 18 hours notice. They don't carry heavy equipment or anything like that. But these guys are now being put on alert, potentially, to reinforce the Marines once they make their landing. Now, the timeline for this, which again gets back to, we have to talk about when this stuff is all playing out. The timeline for the Marines and the 82nd Airborne to arrive is this weekend. So our big story is about what happened this past weekend, which is that Trump made his grand ultimatum, this grand gesture. We're going to destroy the global energy market. We're going to tank the economy. We don't care. And then at the last minute, before the markets open, he chickens out. But specifically, he pushes the operation back by 5 days, which takes us to the following weekend, which takes us to Friday. And Trump says there's a big deal in the works. We're having a very strong talk, and they've basically agreed already. It's a done deal. This is how it sounds. At the same time that we have this reprieve, that this operation has been postponed, you still have now what appears to be a pretty serious ground force moving into position for the attack. So you almost wonder, did Trump extend the deadline by a week because he's waiting for the Marines to get there? Because then the Marines and the 82nd Airborne are going to attack next weekend? The markets close Friday, he makes the ultimatum. The markets open, he pushes it back until the next weekend. Friday, the markets close. There's a ground operation in Iran. They see if it is successful. And then maybe by the time markets open the following Monday, he's got better news. Maybe that is how Trump is playing this. And we'll talk about all that. We'll give you the details. We'll get into what precisely is happening. But it appears, at least for now, this is our second aspect of it, that the Pentagon, the military planners, Central Command, they have not abandoned their plans to invade Iran in some capacity. And so I think we're going to see that before the war is over. So we're going to talk all about the timeline. We'll talk about the force package, and we'll try to spell out the pattern of how we got to this point. Because I think if you look at how the war started over the past 3 weeks, how the war has been conducted, it tells us a lot about what we just witnessed in the past few days and where we're going potentially in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we're going to talk all about that. That's going to be our main story. It's another day talking about the war in Iran. Before we get into it, I want to remind you to smash the follow button on Rumble, smash the like button, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the show. Remember to check out our merch store, Fuentes.store. We're going to have our brand new spring collection dropping tomorrow. So I know I said it was going to come out today, but we had some back-end issues. Tomorrow for sure, we have our brand new spring collection dropping. I think you're really going to like it. Like I said, our winter collection, a lot of people loved it. It sold really well. A lot of people bought it. But I know that some people said we changed things up a little bit. A lot of the designs were a little bit generic. People said it was a lot of logos and a lot of stuff that just said America First and American flags and everything. But I think that this spring collection, it's a true return to form. It's a little bit more streetwear. It's a little more trendy and fun and funny. So I think you'll like it. That's tomorrow. So hold off, check out the store if you still got to get the hat. But maybe you hold off a little bit because, like I said, tomorrow and this week, we're going to have a huge new lineup on the store. So that's Fuentes.store. Subscribe to our America First Plus membership at americafirst.plus. $15 a month. You get the whole archive, every episode of the show, every interview, every debate, every piece of content I've ever made. It's all in the archive website for the low price of $15 a month. And there's features too. You get an MP3 version of the show. You get MP3 downloads. So if you don't want to waste your data plan or you go on an airplane or whatever, you can download an MP3 of the show. You get the RSS feed. And if you subscribe for $30 a month, you get an AI-powered search engine. And a lot of people are getting a kick out of this because you can use the AI search engine to find every time I've talked about a particular topic. So some of the Clippers find it useful. And some people just like to take a stroll down memory lane. They're just curious. And it's funny because I think a lot of people wouldn't want an AI-powered search algorithm because then you'd see a lot of wrong predictions, inconsistency, changing positions, things like that. I'm a little bit gassy tonight. I just ate a bunch of tacos, so I'm a little bit gassy. Little bit of brapping going on here. Little brab going on the show. But anyway, what people are finding instead, and I noticed this, people are actually using it. They're using the AI search-powered engine or AI-powered search engine, and they're going back 7-8 years to see my take on Venezuela. And it's exactly the same. It's literally 100% the same. And they go back to 2020 and look at my take on Iran. And it's identical. It's the same take. And I've seen a lot of people lately, they say on Instagram and on Twitter, people say I switched up. People say that I'm flip-flopping. I only make correct predictions because I make every prediction. So it's heads I win, tails you lose. But if you go back and you watch all the old shows on the archive, it's 100% the same thing. So that's AmericaFirst.plus. $100 a month club. You also get access to the group chat with me. I like to think that I've been going off in the group chat. The $100 a month club has been eating lately. They've been getting a lot of bonus content. And I tried to add it up over the past week. I think I did 2.5, maybe 3 hours of bonus content just in the group chat. And these are like voice messages. Sometimes I drop them before the show, sometimes after, sometimes on the weekend. And I also hang out in the group chat as well and answer questions, talk to people, all that kind of stuff. And so I've been very active in there over the past week, giving a lot of moment-by-moment coverage and breaking news on the unfolding situation in Iran. So if you want more analysis, more show, that's the place to go. That's AmericaFirst.plus. People are always asking me, I get like DM requests on Twitter or emails, and people say, how do I get the $100 a month club? It's AmericaFirst.plus. That's the website. So check it out. Before we get into our news about Iran and everything, I just have to say this because I've noticed this, and I don't know if you guys can relate, but it's really pissing me off lately, and I said this on my Telegram channel this morning. I don't know about you, but lately I go on Twitter and it feels like literally everything on Twitter now is AI. Is that just me? Because I actually feel like I'm going insane sometimes. I spend a lot of time on Twitter or X because I have to, because I'm covering the news and I want to see the breaking news. I want to see the developments as they happen. And I have to cover everything for my show. So I'm on Twitter constantly. And I was just thinking this weekend. It just sort of dawned on me. I'm on Twitter and I look at a tweet and then I go to the replies, and without fail, it's like every single reply on every single tweet is AI now. And the problem with AI is that unlike the spam bots that you used to have on Twitter, the AI, it almost appears organic enough that you actually have to read it to realize it's AI. It's like the way that it's formatted, the way it's written. Because if it was a spam bot, it would be filled with emojis, or it would have like italicized characters and writing, or it would be the same message, it'd be like, something in bio, whatever. Now the AI they produce, if you just look at it without reading it, it just looks like a normal post. Then you read it and you realize this is just Chat GPT. This is AI generated. And it's every tweet, every reply. Those are all the top replies. And you actually have to read through like 10 or 20 replies before you get to anybody even real. And most of them, sometimes it's hard to tell. Some are more obvious than others. And even a lot of the content on Twitter too. I see so many AI shorts on Twitter now, especially of like animals. I saw one the other day of like a dog imitating a penguin. And I had to watch it like 3 times to realize it was fake, because you kind of see it on the first go around. You're like, wait, this doesn't quite look right. And this is really freaky. And it's also a little bit of a betrayal, because maybe a lot of people don't remember this. This is sort of my observation from the weekend. I think everybody recognizes the dead internet is getting worse. It used to be the case that we don't know how many people are even real on the internet. Now it's like, it's all AI. And it's AI posting everything. And then it's AI reading all the AI posts. That's now the data set that trains the AI that then makes additional posts. So we're in this like recursive AI content creation loop. But the other thing, which is maybe besides the point a little bit, and again, a lot of people don't remember this, but wasn't the whole point of Elon acquiring Twitter in the first place to crack down on spam? I know that wasn't maybe the central reason. The central reason was obviously political influence. And maybe he buttressed that by saying it was about free speech. And it's about making sure that everything that is legal is allowed on the platform. I forget, he had a slogan about that. But basically saying as long as it's allowed by the First Amendment, then it should be allowed on Twitter. But he also made this big push back in 22 and 23. He said, the big reason I'm taking over Twitter is because of all the spam. He said, spam is out of control, and that is artificially inflating Twitter's metrics. And that's actually, it constitutes a form of fraud, because Twitter's business model is advertising, and they quantify the ad payments based on the engagement. If all the content and the following base and the user base is spam accounts, then all the numbers are cooked. And that means that probably Twitter is overvalued significantly. And anyway, so Elon came in 23 and said, the problem with Twitter is spam. I'm going to get at the helm at Twitter, and I'm going to get rid of all the spam, and we're going to improve the platform. And the irony is, I don't even think that was a problem at all. I don't know about you, but back in 2022 and before then, spam was almost never a problem. It existed, it was there, but it's definitely way worse now. And it's so bad that it's actually ruining the platform. It used to exist, and arguably it was a problem, but it's far worse now. And back then, it was something that you could ignore. Now it's like 50% of the content on the platform. So I don't know, like, is anyone doing anything about that? Are they aware of that? But I don't like it. And I said this on the show the other week. I feel like this is the worst phase of technology to date. Not to go full boomer, not to go full and prim, whatever. But it was bad enough when we had Facebook, YouTube, iPhones, and texting. Now that you have X, short form video content, and AI, I really think this is like a long-term and fundamental problem, especially for the young people, but for the whole society. This is really getting out of control. And I feel like that's not really talked about a lot, but we all see it. I mean, we all see that, right? I see this on Twitter. It's every post, every reply, every video. And I'm like, okay, so how many actual users are on the platform? I feel like 80% of what I see is written or generated by AI. It's all these like spam accounts, and they're all verified, and they're all pushing like a political view. They're all in favor of the war. They're all pro-Trump. They're all some species of like pro-West, America defender, Trump girl, 1776, whatever. And even as a dissident right, whatever you want to call it, even as a far right, anti-war, Israel critical influencer, that's my whole timeline is AI spam, NPC spam. It's like relationship stuff, like just like the most slop, low IQ normie observations. It's like black Twitter stuff. And I feel like it's rotting my brain. I feel like I got to get back to puzzles and reading books because this can't be good for anybody. Anyway, so I don't know if you guys have noticed that, but I'm on Twitter all the time for my show, and it's just like, it's really getting to be a problem. It's like inescapable right now. But anyway, that's that. I do want to move on. I want to get into our coverage of the war in Iran. Like I said, day 24 of the conflict. We've now entered the 4th week. 2 more weeks, guys, just 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks to flatten Iran, and then we're out. Then we're done. And our big development for today is about the mother of all tacos. Trump always chickens out. And honestly, this one caught me a little bit by surprise. I can't lie. I honestly thought on Saturday, I said, there's no way he's walking away from this. Because my gut, and I'll explain it in just a moment, but my gut was, he always chickens out. Every time he does this, with Russia, with China, with North Korea, with Europe, with Canada, with Mexico, he always makes these big over-the-top threats and ultimatums, and then invariably, every time, he always chickens out. And so he'll tell Russia, you've got 60 days to make a deal, or else, I don't know, something's going to happen. And then we arrive at the deadline, and Trump says, never mind, we're making great progress. There's really no need for that. He'll say with China, if China puts tariffs, if they retaliate with tariffs against our tariffs, well, then we're going to increase it to 100% and then 200% and China retaliates with tariffs, and then Trump begs Beijing to back off. So this has been the pattern over the past year and a half. You had this in the first administration, but it's really a problem in the second term. So on Saturday, Trump issues this huge ultimatum against Iran. I didn't get a chance to cover it because I didn't do a show on Saturday. But over the weekend, Trump puts out on Truth Social this huge threat and says, if Iran doesn't open up the Strait of Hormuz in 48 hours, then we are going to destroy their energy infrastructure. We're going to destroy their oil, their natural gas, all their critical infrastructure. As we have talked about up until this point, this is the nuclear option. Not the literal nuclear option, which might still be on the table, but this is a huge red line in the conflict to cross. If he did that, it would constitute a significant escalation, which Trump has been trying to avoid, actually. And we talked about this all last week. The reason that Trump and the United States don't want to make this an energy war is because, one, an energy war of any kind will constrain the global energy supply and cause inflation. Everything runs on energy. Transportation, industry, all of it. It all runs fundamentally on electricity and fossil fuels. And even the electricity runs on fossil fuels for the most part also. So if we attack Iran's energy, we constrain all the energy and prices go up. But then additionally, Iran can do the same thing to us and our energy providers. And so what we do to them, they will visit upon us, and the effect is compounded. They will attack the energy in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, elsewhere, and that will further constrain the energy supply, further increase prices. So that's why this is a really big deal. Trump says if they don't open up the strait, which they're surely not going to do, if they don't open up the strait, we're going to decimate their energy. Predictably, Iran almost immediately comes out and threatens exactly that. Iran's foreign minister comes out within hours of Trump's statement and says, well, if the United States bombs our energy, we'll bomb Saudi Arabia, we'll bomb Qatar, we'll bomb the United Arab Emirates. And what's more, Iran said that energy infrastructure is civilian infrastructure. So Trump is talking about the electrical grid. He's actually talking about power plants. He's talking about the electrical grid. He's actually talking about the supply of energy in Iran. Just like in Ukraine, this is a very big factor in their war. So the foreign minister of Iran comes out and says, this is civilian infrastructure. It's also energy infrastructure. So if we get hit in that way, which technically is a war crime, then we will not only retaliate against the Gulf energy infrastructure, Saudi Aramco, Qatari LNG, and other energy infrastructure, but Iran says also we will attack other civilian infrastructure like desalination. Now, if you know anything about the Arabian Peninsula, it's a desert. They don't have drinking water. They don't have fresh water supply there. They don't have lakes and rivers like we do. And so the way that they provide water for their huge population on these coastal cities is they desalinate the water. They take water from the Gulf and they remove the salt, the salinity, and that makes it available to drink. And these desalination plants in Qatar, in the United Arab Emirates, they supply the drinking water for the entire population. And if those desalination plants go offline, they only have a supply of drinking water for about a month. That's a big problem for the millions upon millions of people that live in these cities that rely on that for water. Otherwise, they die. Very quickly, you have forget about energy prices, forget about inflation. Now you've got a real problem on your hands with the tens of millions of people that live in all these major cities. So this is all predictable. And we talked about this last week. It cannot become an energy war because Iran actually, in this narrow context, maintains escalation dominance. And that means that they hold the ultimate checkmate. They have the ace up their sleeve. They have the better hand in this. They can always take it further. Whatever we do to them, they maintain the ability to launch drones and ballistic missiles because of the mobility, the abundance, how cheap and economical these weapon systems are. And so we can literally drop nukes on them. We can drop the biggest conventional ordnance on them. We can hit them as hard as possible with our whole arsenal. We could invade, for that matter. We could even invade. And they would still maintain the ability to launch missiles from the shoulder or from the back of a pickup truck going 100 miles an hour on the coast. They could still launch drones that can and will hit the desalination plant, Saudi Aramco, Qatari's LNG facilities, and inflict severe detrimental problems on the Gulf countries and then the global economy. So this is why we didn't want to take it there, because whatever we do to Iran, they could always do something worse to us, something that we actually cannot tolerate. And so this is why I say Trump makes this threat on Saturday, and he's really putting his credibility on the line, because it wasn't exactly ambiguous. There wasn't a lot of wiggle room here. Trump said in all capital letters, you have 48 hours. Open up the strait or else. If you don't open the strait in 48 hours, we're attacking Bushehr, we're attacking your electrical grid, we're attacking your power plants, and that's it. And that's your last chance for peace. These are his words. Now, the reason that this is a bit conflicting is because you say, on the one hand, Trump always chickens out. So if this is like all the other threats that Trump has given over the past 2 years or year and a half, well, he'll probably back down. Because as I said, there's a quick survey of examples. There was the trade war with China almost exactly a year ago today, where Trump chickened out. There was his ultimatum, or actually series of threats against Russia over the entire course of last year, where Trump always backed down and chickened out. And so you see this threat over the weekend and say, surely this is not serious. Because if Trump follows through, and almost certainly he's going to have to, Iran maintains this capability. They're not going to open up the strait. They know how that will play out. They know that they're able to hit the Gulf, and Trump knows that, and they know Trump knows that, and so on and so forth. I said, so surely Monday will come. The Strait of Hormuz will remain closed. Trump will be forced to make good on the threat. But he knows what will happen, which is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for all the Gulf countries. It's unacceptable for Washington. So if history is our guide, then Trump will have to, in that case, back down. Monday will come. They will not open up the strait, and Trump is going to have to say, forget it, never mind. At the same time, as we've talked about in this conflict so far, we are in a stalemate. And the stalemate consists in the fact, as we've just discussed, that Iran maintains escalation dominance. There's nothing we can do to Iran to either A, topple their regime and destroy the personnel that are carrying out and prosecuting the war, or two, suppress their ability to inflict damage on infrastructure in the Gulf and against the United States and Israel, and close the Strait of Hormuz. So if there's nothing that we can do to escalate and win, then the only available option is either we got to stick it out and fight a war of attrition. We have to fight literally until Iran runs out of ammunition or personnel, or until their society collapses after a prolonged siege, which is devastating for us. Or, and this is the most likely outcome, we have to retreat. We will have to retreat without achieving all of our objectives. We'll have to leave the Iranian regime intact. They effectively exercised a veto over our war using the Strait of Hormuz, which means that now we've ceded control of the strait and therefore the global energy market to Iran. And even though we've inflicted a lot of damage on Iran's military, they will be able to say for those reasons, it's a strategic victory for them. They will say the U.S. and Israel threw everything at us and we survived. And that's our mandate to govern. That is why the Islamic regime isn't going anywhere. And what's more, the United States better not try that again. And there's a word for this. It's called deterrence. Iran has reestablished deterrence over the U.S. and Israel, whereas in the past, the U.S. and Israel provoked Iran repeatedly and confronted Iran and seemed fearless in provoking and confronting Iran because they made assumptions that they could defeat Iran. Now, Iran is able to say, well, you tried it and you failed, you lost. You didn't get what you wanted. We denied you. And so now in the future, you will be less likely to confront us again because you saw what we're made of and you saw what you're up against. You saw that in the end, there's nothing you can do We're too big, too many people, our bench is too deep, we have too many drones and missiles. So in the future, you're not going to try it. We have effectively deterred you from intervening again. Now this is a very critical concept. The reason that Trump wants to escalate to de-escalate, the reason that Trump wants to find a way to exert leverage against Iran through escalation, without boots on the ground, without nukes, to break the stalemate, is because he knows, and the military planners know, and Israel knows, that if we just walk away without any grand finale, without a climax, without actually achieving anything tangible or persuasive that we can tell people that we won, then that is what it looks like. It looks like we went whole hog, we didn't get what we wanted, we shrugged, and we walked away. And the whole world has taken notice, Iran included, and their people, that Iran won the war. So what Trump is trying to do to break the stalemate is he is going to have to, in a way, bluff his way out of this. In order to avert a situation where he loses face and gives Iran that strategic victory, he's going to have to find a way to land a blow against Iran in a way that doesn't escalate out of control, where we're invading or bringing boots on the ground, or there's serious casualties, or there's some humiliating American tactical defeat. He's going to need to inflict some kind of blow to increase leverage, to extract some concession, and that is your escalate to de-escalate. Increasing the firepower in a creative way to achieve a tactical victory so that we can retreat with honor, withdraw with some dignity. And that way, we break the stalemate, we exit the conflict without losing face, without losing deterrence, without handing Iran that strategic victory. So what is very important about all of this is credibility. If Trump is telling Iran, hey, we don't care, we'll destroy your energy, and even if you retaliate, hey, see if we care, we can take it, we're strong, we're fortified. Trump has to effectively convince Iran that he is suicidal. He has to convince Iran that he is willing to do things to them that might be detrimental for us, but we don't care. It's a confidence game. It's a game of chicken. He's got to bluff his way out of this. He needs to convince them he's serious, that he might invade, that he might send a ground force in, that he's willing to drag this on for 100 days. I think that's what a lot of these leaks and planted stories and even logistical moves are about. When they say we're preparing for a 100-day conflict or going into September or the fall, what they are signaling to Iran is, don't think you're going to stick it out. Don't think you're going to wait us out and you're going to bleed us with oil. They're almost communicating in irrationality. It's a madman strategy. They're telling Iran, if you think that you've got us by the balls, if you think that you're going to use the oil market to hurt us economically and you're going to force our hand and you're going to somehow get out of this scot-free, you're mistaken, because we're settling in for the long haul. And I think that's why they make those moves. Because every time you see a statement like that, every time you see a story like that that says we're moving intelligence and logistics personnel down to Florida until September, when they say we need $200 billion to fight a 6-month war, when they say these things, we're going to hear that and groan and say, oh, another forever war. When Trump says, we're considering boots on the ground, I don't care about the poll numbers, I don't care if it's popular, we groan, but Iran says maybe they're serious. And then the planners in Iran have to wonder, are we overplaying our hand? Because if there's a chance that the U.S. and Israel are crazy enough to stick it out, if they think, again, and they might not be certain, but that's all they need is a seed of doubt. If they have any doubt that the Strait of Hormuz strategy is working or not, and they think maybe the U.S. can tolerate the hit to energy, the hit to the economy, that they have an appetite for a protracted attritional conflict at a low level, well, they're going to start to ponder their mortality. And they're going to wonder, how much of this can we take? Sure, we can close the strait and it will cause inflation and there will be some difficult correction in the U.S. economy, but we're literally going to get assassinated. In a long enough timeline, if the war does go on until the summer or the fall, the leadership might actually get killed. And with all these airstrikes at this pace, thousands of airstrikes every day, maybe we won't have a military by the end of this, and maybe Iranian society will collapse. But in order for Trump to achieve that effect, he needs them to be confident in his threats. He needs credibility to reestablish deterrence in the other direction. And so this is why on Saturday, when Trump made the threat, I said, although he always chickens out, he's gonna have to follow through. Because although Iran's retaliation against our energy would be devastating if Trump followed through, if he chickens out, it might be worse. Because chickening out causes us to lose credibility, lose face, and then we lose our ability, we lose our credibility to bluff and convince Iran that they don't have us by the balls. And yet, Trump chickened out. Even though this is like the all-important ultimatum, you can't do this. It's so reckless in a conflict of this nature, in the situation that we're in. Trump chickened out. And so this morning, it did surprise me, actually. Trump came out this morning and said, actually, we're going to postpone the deadline. We're going to give Iran 5 days. If Iran doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz within the new timeline, which is by the end of this week, then we will carry out the strikes. He said, but we're postponing it because we're actually making progress on a deal. Trump says that his administration has spoken to the Iranian regime and they have made progress on a framework for a deal, one where the U.S. and Iran might actually work together. And Trump also implied that the deal is almost finalized. He said that every point of agreement, or rather every point of contention, has been resolved. And they agree on all the fundamentals, and Iran has agreed to share the strait and give up nuclear enrichment and give up their highly enriched material and all these things. And this is just, in the first place, who even believes this? At 7:30 a.m., Trump comes out in the press pool and on Truth Social, and first of all says, never mind, forget the 48-hour deadline, we're postponing it by 5 days. And you think, this is just not serious. There's nothing serious about any of this. Trump is not serious. This is not a serious government. This is a joke. They're lying. I don't believe them. They're flying by the seat of their pants. Everything they do is ad hoc. Everything they do is last minute. There was no plan going into this. There was no plan B. And so they're literally making it up as they go along. And this is just ridiculous. And so Trump says, we're calling off the deadline. Okay, so every day it's something different. You have no credibility. Nobody believes even what you're saying. It's all a lie. But then he goes into the press pool and says, we've talked to Iran. We agree on everything. They've agreed on every point. And you say, that's a lie. Who believes that? I don't even believe they're talking to the Iranian government. Who would they be talking to? I don't even think that's the case. You're not talking to Iran. And then he says, well, we're reaching a deal. We have a very strong deal and we have all this agreement. No, you don't. Trump said that Iran has agreed to share the Strait of Hormuz with America. Why would they do that? If anything, it's the opposite. Iran has said, even when the conflict ends, there will be a new dynamic in the Strait of Hormuz, meaning they want control over the strait the way that Egypt has control over the Suez. And if you don't know what that means, it means they want sovereignty over it. They want the Strait of Hormuz to be effectively Iranian territory. And that means they want to charge a toll. So all the shipping that goes through, just like the shipping that goes through Panama and just like the shipping that goes through the Suez, they want to extract a fee, a toll on all the shipping that goes through. So that's what they're saying, and that makes sense. They've earned it. They've fought for it, and they've won that. They have that right now. It was reported today that a few tankers paid a $2 million toll to cross the strait this morning. So they have that. They fought for it, they have it, and we have no ability to suppress that. So why then would they agree to share this newly won capability with the United States, their mortal enemy? It doesn't make any sense. And their demands, if you read them last week, are opposites. Iran demands that the U.S. leave all its military bases in the Middle East and pay reparations and give them control of the strait and never attack Iran again. Those are Iran's demands. And the U.S. demands are that Iran cannot have any ballistic missiles and they cannot have nuclear enrichment and they have to give over their highly enriched uranium. And these two positions are completely the opposite. And yet Trump in the press pool says it's basically a done deal. So what is really going on? That's the question. And we're going to get to the bottom of it. This is a story from the Wall Street Journal. We'll work through some of these announcements and then we'll talk about a few different aspects of this. It says, quote, on Saturday night, President Trump, who spent the weekend at his Mar-a-Lago club, gave Iran an ultimatum to reopen the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, or the U.S. military would obliterate the country's power plants. 2 days later, as word of the discussions in Riyadh made its way to the White House, Trump reversed course, embracing diplomacy with Tehran and putting his threatened strikes on hold. Trump's shift Monday morning followed a series of closed-door discussions through Middle Eastern intermediaries that U.S. officials said gave them hope that an agreement to settle the conflict was possible. It also reflected a growing desire by Trump and some of his advisors to bring the war to a close. Trump's announcement that he would postpone for 5 days strikes on Iranian power plants triggered a stock market rally, giving the president a small reprieve after weeks of pain on Wall Street. But Arab mediators privately expressed skepticism that the U.S. and Iran could quickly reach an agreement, noting that the two sides remained far apart. Trump's assertion that the talks were productive was met with pushback from Iranian officials who denied that the discussions were taking place. So, like I said, we don't even know what's going on. Trump is lying, and we really have no clue. How much of this is the fog of war? How much of this is just BS from Trump? It goes on, it says, as a condition of any deal to end the war, Iran is demanding that the U.S. and Israel pledge not to launch future attacks. Tehran is pushing for compensation for damages sustained during the war. The U.S. still wants what it sought from Iran before the war started, which is the dismantling of Tehran's nuclear complex, a suspension of its ballistic missile program, and a stop to its support for proxy militias. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, Iran's parliamentary speaker and one of the country's top remaining officials, suggested Monday that Tehran wasn't yet ready for negotiations with Washington. He wrote in English a few hours after Trump's comments, quote, Iranian people demand complete and remorseful punishment of the aggressors. He said that such optimism about negotiations is, quote, used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and escape the quagmire in which the U.S. and Israel are trapped. So let's unpack this a little bit. Here's the timeline. So Thursday, there are these reports that Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar are lobbying the United States to make peace with Iran. These mediators are stepping in and they're trying to find a resolution. Europe is advocating for this behind the scenes as well. And so there is talk of talking. There are a lot of rumors that back channels and closed door, indirect meetings through intermediaries are happening. We have no idea if that's true. But there's all these rumors that some Iranian personnel are indirectly talking to some American personnel about how to bring the war to a close. And this is being brokered, like I said, by other regional powers. Now, I wouldn't read too much into this because as it stands right now, these Arab intermediaries, they seem to have no influence at all. It was these Arab intermediaries that tried to get the U.S. and Iran together for this second round of negotiations a month ago. It was Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, Oman, Turkey, Pakistan, Egypt, all these countries. They all tried in February to get the U.S. and Iran back together in a room, which they then did in Oman, in Switzerland, to try to hash it out, and it didn't work. And they are lobbying the United States to try to de-escalate the conflict even now. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the Emirates, they want us to finish Iran off, but they want the war over because they cannot sustain these attacks on their infrastructure. It's destroying their real estate, tourism, banking industries, not to mention energy, not to mention the trade that's been disrupted with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. And that's not working either. So there's much talk, none of it confirmed, none of it verified, and all of it being denied. Iran denies they're talking to the United States in any capacity. And yet there are these persistent rumors that Arab countries are trying to broker a deal. This is on Thursday. Saturday, Trump makes this ultimatum and says that Iran has to open up the strait or else. Now, as I said at the top of the show, one of the theories here, one of the working theories, is that everything that Trump does, all of these bellicose threats, all of the biggest operations, they always happen during the weekend. And I'm talking about just in the past several weeks since this war started. If you recall, the war started on Friday at midnight, which is in the middle of the daytime in Iran. Normally, you don't launch your all-out ambush sneak attack during the day because you want to do it under the cover of darkness. So why did they do it at midnight on Friday? Well, they gave some excuses. They said there was confidence that the Ayatollah would be in his residence at that time. They had to act on the intelligence. And there's some other tactical reasons, they said. Could possibly the reason be that the markets had closed? The markets open on Monday morning. They close on Friday afternoon. So did Trump wait until the markets closed to launch an attack on Iran? Why would he do that? Well, the reason is any war in the Persian Gulf is going to cause significant pain in the stock market because oil, natural gas, fertilizer, and other essential commodities, helium, as well as aluminum, many things, especially things that are needed for data centers, technology, that all moves through the Persian Gulf and out the Strait of Hormuz. Everybody knows you bomb Iran, Strait of Hormuz is closed, and you're going to get an economic catastrophe. So in other words, Trump waits for the markets to close to basically cuck all the traders and investors. They're panicking. They see the writing on the wall, which is that there's going to be a global energy crisis, followed by a food shortage, followed by the entire AI bubble is going to burst. In that order. You bomb Iran, they close the Strait of Hormuz. Strait of Hormuz is closed. You constrain the supply of LNG, which causes huge price spikes in Europe. It constrains the supply of oil, which causes an energy shortage in Asia, and the price of oil skyrockets, and it causes inflation. After that, because fertilizer flows through the Gulf, most farmers have not secured fertilizer yet, you're going to have a food shortage. That's going to cause all inflation to rise. Without helium, without other components, the cost of electricity coupled with the cost of components for data centers is going to make all of these AI companies not profitable because they run on energy and commodities that go through the strait. And that is the source of all the GDP growth for the past year. So you have these cascading effects that all the traders and investors know about, but they can't do anything about it until Monday. So Trump launches the attack Friday night, and they say the war will last 4 days. Well, why do they say 4 days? Because by the third day, you also have the timing that it was the Jewish holiday of Purim, which was on Monday, which is interesting. And that's when the Jews commemorate the slaughter of 80,000 Iranians after they win a war against them. But why do they say 4 days? They want to launch the war on Friday after markets close, fight really hard through Saturday, through Sunday, hoping that by Monday morning, it's almost over. And by Monday morning, everybody is relieved. Everybody is no longer panicking. They see that Trump has got everything under control. They're trusting the plan. Plan trusters are in control, and the economy resumes as normal. Maybe that was the play. And it was also last week that Trump launched the attack on Kharg Island. Remember when Trump bombed Kharg Island, which is the central hub of Iran's energy that goes through the Persian Gulf? That was on a Friday as well. Bombed all the military assets, not the energy, but the military assets, the runway strip and the dock and all the military assets, also on a Friday. And then this weekend launches this ultimatum on Saturday night. 48 hours expires on Monday night. And the question is, did Trump do all of this so that by Monday morning, if Iran did not open up the strait, then Trump could call it all off and he could say, well, we're not going to hit Iran anymore, so all of Wall Street can relax. He says it after the markets close, so they'll all panic in the after hours trading. And then before markets open on Monday morning, he can change his mind. And it looks like that's exactly what happened. Just judging by the timeline alone, his announcement on Saturday caused everything to tank. It caused oil to skyrocket, gold collapsed, Bitcoin collapsed, the S&P 500 collapsed. Everything collapsed on Saturday because, again, all the investors and traders priced in that we're going to be rebuilding the energy economy for the next 5 years. If Trump bombs these power plants and Iran bombs, they unleash on LNG, oil, and desalination, it's over. And they knew that. But then Trump saves the day on Monday morning and says, you know what, never mind. And then the markets flipped. And all of a sudden, when the markets open a half hour later, everything rallies. And so whereas the market lost $2 trillion on Saturday, it made up about half of that minutes after Trump's announcement on Monday morning. And you have to wonder, first of all, clearly there is a calculated deception going on. This is part of U.S. tactics and strategy. You cannot trust the government in a time of war because what the government says and does is also read and heard and seen by the enemy. So it's a signal. It's not just information for the masses. It's a signal to our opponents. So from on its face, from first principles, you can't trust what the government says, but we also now know the government is just engaging in strategic lying. They're just lying about everything. All the actors in the whole government are lying about everything all the time. They're lying about that school that was hit. They're lying about who started the war, the imminent threat. They're lying about everything. And this whole 48-hour ultimatum was a ruse. It was another deception. That's one. So number one is you can't trust Trump on anything. Everything he says is a lie. Number two, aside from that, and maybe more to the point, Trump is conducting a foreign policy with regard to the markets. And you sort of have to do that on some level. We are in a war of attrition. It's now an economic war. And that means that it concerns the allocation of resources. It's not just about killing their guys and blowing up their stuff. It's now about supply chains, logistics, securing essential commodities, keeping our economy going, controlling prices in the world. If that's the case, then you do have to take into account how the markets are going to react. And Trump, as commander-in-chief fighting this economic attritional war, he does have to take care of the markets. He does have to reassure the people that are buying and selling the commodities, that are speculating on the commodities. Number three, and this is maybe the most problematic aspect of it, and this is a question I think everybody's been asking from the beginning. All of that is fine and well. I actually don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this. Because if you are in a war, you can't telegraph all your moves, actually. You do need secrecy, and sometimes you do need to float out a signal that deceives the enemy. I'm not necessarily against that. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that. And I also don't think there's anything inherently wrong with reassuring the markets. Is that a good strategy? I don't think so. But is that technically part of the commander-in-chief's job if you're fighting an attritional war? I don't think that's outside of bounds for his jurisdiction, for his job. But this is the rub, and this is what everybody's secretly wondering. So who knew? Who knew that Trump was going to call it off, and when did they know that? This is the problem. Because Trump does this all the time, where he puts out something on Truth Social or something on TV or in a press pool. And as you know, it does affect the markets, and trillions of dollars are made and lost on a whim, based on what he says, based on what he tweets. He controls the movement of all that wealth and all of that stuff. If you knew just 10 minutes before that post was going out, you could have made a lot of money. You could have placed a lot of big bets, and you could have made millions, billions, depending on what kind of capital you're working with. And so you got to wonder, if you knew that that announcement was coming on Saturday, and if you knew that that announcement was coming on Monday, based on conversations with the president, or you knew some other way, you could have made a fortune shorting everything on Saturday and then making money on Monday. You could have made a small fortune. And as people have reported, many people have. Many people did put in some very conspicuous positions on Saturday and on Monday and did make a lot of money. And you wonder how much prior knowledge they had. Is the government making moves like this? Are government personnel making moves like this? Because if so, then this is the most corrupt administration in history. And I don't think that's, again, that other stuff, fine and well. You could say that is within your purview as the president of the United States. You want to confuse the enemy. You want to reassure the markets. But if every post that goes out concerning tariffs, concerning trade, war with Russia, war with Iran, if all of that is known in advance by advisors and leaked to other people, well, there could be a lot of cronies that are being enriched by that True Social account. And that's not okay. That's like Banana Republic, Soviet levels of corruption. And that's the part I don't like. But so that's one angle on what is happening. Now, and I think to a large extent, that explains what is happening. I think that's just true. That every weekend since the war started, this is how the U.S. and Trump in particular are prosecuting the war. It's a confidence game. It's a confidence game between the U.S. and Iran. It's a confidence game in the markets, in the U.S. market. And this is why Trump does the most provocative, destabilizing things during the weekend, and I think tends to exercise more restraint during the week, because he knows that a vital aspect of this attritional war is that reassurance and making sure that the economy doesn't completely melt down in the early stages of the war. And like I said, I think that's just undeniable at this point. But let's talk about the larger point. So as we've said, we're in this stalemate. And where we left off last week is that Trump is looking for a creative way to break the stalemate. So 2 weeks ago, he hit Karg Island. As we discussed, that is an island in the Persian Gulf, about 300 miles northwest of the Strait of Hormuz, This is where 90% of all of Iran's oil and energy is exported. That's where it's picked up on tankers and then it moves to its final destination. It was 2 weeks ago that Trump launched a huge air campaign against the island, not attacking its energy infrastructure, but against its military assets. And then the following day, Trump authorized an Israeli strike on Iran's gas fields, the southern Pars gas fields, which has so much gas alone in that field it could power the world for years. It's a huge energy reserve. And as we talked about, what those two developments showed is that potentially the United States is inching towards an energy war, which would mark a significant escalation. This is a stalemate. It has become an attritional economic war, and it is a question of the economics of missiles and interceptors, the air and sea campaign of the United States, and the drone and missile capability of Iran. The military pain we can inflict on Iranian personnel and hardware, and the economic pain they can inflict on the Gulf and the world economy with their strikes on the Strait and on the GCC nations. So this is the stalemate. And Trump is looking for a way out of it. We don't seem to be able to stop Iran from closing the Strait. We don't seem to be able to topple their government or suppress their other fire against Israel, U.S. assets in the Gulf, although we are hitting them very hard. As long as the war goes on, we are paying the price economically because the price of energy, the price of food is going up and is threatening our very fragile economy, which is emerging from stagflation. Now, the only realm in which Trump seems to be able to escalate is this third avenue into the realm of energy. We're using all of our air power, all of our sea power, and we can't achieve our objectives. We don't want to walk away, but we also don't want to use ground force. We don't want to invade. We don't want to use a nuclear weapon, which is how we control the escalation ladder. So what can we do that's short of nuking them, short of an invasion, but also is a way to increase leverage against Iran so that we don't have to retreat and surrender? Trump is looking for options in that area. He's looking for options that fit that criterion. And it seems that the only leverage we can have over them, because we're bombing their personnel, we're bombing their military hardware, we're bombing their bases, regime targets, we're bombing everything, their nuclear infrastructure even this weekend. What can we increase without increasing too much? And it seems that the only category of targets that fits that criteria is energy. But as we talked about, the reason we don't want to go that far is because if we escalate the war against Iran's energy, they retaliate in exactly the same way. And this is a fine line. This is a tripwire that neither side wants to activate. If we bomb Iran's energy, they hit the Gulf, and the effects of the attrition are far worse. And Iran doesn't want to hit our energy because then they lose all their leverage. We got nothing left to lose if they hit everything in Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and the other Gulf nations. So it seems that the only way that we can escalate is in that category. And yet that's the one category that we also can't touch. And so Trump is trying to find a middle ground. How can we bluff and convince Iran that we're going for their energy without actually doing it? Because if we do it, it's 10 times worse for us. But we need them to think that we're willing to do it anyway. So maybe that's why last weekend, again during the weekend, Trump bombs Karg Island, their number one energy hub, but not their energy, just the military assets. It's just a little too close to comfort, and it's a warning shot. Trump is telling Iran, don't test us, because next time we'll hit the energy. Well, Iran didn't get the message. So 3 days later, Trump authorizes Israel to bomb Iran's southern Pars gas fields. And then we really hit their energy. And Trump said, how do you like that? Okay, so we bombed Karg Island. You didn't flinch. Now we hit the southern Pars gas fields. What now? Well, predictably, Iran carried out their attacks, which I'm sure were planned in advance, against Qatar's LNG plant, which supplies 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas. And they hit Saudi Aramco. And they hit a number of other targets in the Gulf as well. And this was catastrophic. And immediately the market reacted first, and then Trump came out and said, we had nothing to do with this Israeli strike, and as long as you don't keep going against us, we will restrain Israel from attacking your energy. So you see that Trump is testing the boundaries here. It's a game of chicken. It's a push and pull. Hit Kharg Island, no reaction. Hit the gas fields, whoops, too far. Iran retaliated, and we realized quickly, and the Gulf convinced us of this, that was a bridge too far. It was detrimental. And so Qatar and the Saudis and the Emiratis came to Washington and said, we can't take hits like this on our energy. If they hit the desalination plant, we're all going to be dehydrated to death. We can't do it. So now this weekend, Trump tries something. Trump, once again, he's back at it. That was last weekend. This weekend, Trump comes out and says he got 48 hours, but this time we're going to do. Then he says, never mind. Now let's talk about the next week. So you might say, and again, there's been rumors of this. Trump says we called off the strikes on Iran's energy because we're working on a deal with Iran through these intermediaries. And I think that's basically a fiction. I don't think that's happening. To the extent that's happening, it's being overhyped and overblown. Turkey, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, they have no influence over us, at least as it pertains to this conflict. They seem to be completely impotent. So their intercession is no help. Trump says, we're talking to Iran. Iran denies it. They say, we haven't even talked to the United States at all. Trump says that we already have an agreement, practically speaking, and there's a, no pun intended, there's a gulf between the two positions. Iran wants us to leave the Middle East, pay them reparations, give them the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States wants Iran to denuclearize, give up their nuclear complex enrichment, their material. We want them to not have ballistic missiles for 5 years. Neither side is even close to the other side. Arguably, we're further apart than when we started. So that's overhyped, overblown. Trump says he's postponing that 5 days because there's an agreement. Well, Iran says they're not even talking. So what's the real reason that Trump postponed for 5 days? Well, if you understand the timeline, you understand perfectly well what's coming next. He's waiting for next weekend, for his next push. Last week was Kharg Island and the southern Pars gas fields. That didn't work. This past weekend was this ultimatum. Iran didn't listen. Next weekend is going to be another big push. So Trump says we're postponing it 5 days pending these negotiations, which Iran denies are even happening. And Arab intermediaries are saying, don't believe the hype, don't get too optimistic. There's no agreement on any of these points between the two countries. Well, simultaneously, while all of this is happening, the United States has deployed 4,000 to 5,000 U.S. Marines on amphibious assault vehicles to the Persian Gulf from the Pacific. These are amphibious assault vessels. What does that mean? It means they're supposed to launch an invasion of the land from the sea. It's 5,000 Marines. They got Osprey aircraft on board. They've got a ground contingent. They've got a sea contingent. They've got all kinds of self-contained systems on these ships. 5,000 Marines headed for the Persian Gulf. And when do they arrive in the Middle East? They will enter CENTCOM's area of responsibility by Friday. The Marines get to the Persian Gulf on Friday. And the other story from today is that not only this force, by the way, keeps being reinforced. It started with 2,200 Marines, and then it increased to 4,000 to 5,000 Marines. And they were sailing for one destination, then the timeline was accelerated and the destination changed. And now today, There are rumors from the Pentagon that the 82nd Airborne Division will join them in the Middle East to reinforce the Marines. So these are ground forces that will parachute in from the air, and they are intended to reinforce the Marines when they get to the Gulf. In what capacity, you might say? Well, this is a story from the New York Times. It says, quote, senior military officials are weighing a possible deployment of a combat brigade from the Army's 82nd Airborne Division and some elements of the division's headquarters staff to support U.S. operations in Iran. The combat forces would come from the 82nd Airborne's Immediate Response Force. That's a brigade of about 3,000 soldiers capable of deploying anywhere in the world within 18 hours. These forces could be used to seize Karg Island, Iran's main oil export hub. Another possibility being considered is an attack by about 2,500 troops from the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, which is already on its way to the region. The airfield on Karg Island was damaged by the recent U.S. bombing raids, so former U.S. commanders said it was more likely to bring in Marines whose combat engineers could quickly repair airfields and other airport infrastructure. Once the airfield is repaired, the Air Force can begin flying in supplies as well as troops, if necessary, by C-130s. In that scenario, it's possible that troops from the 82nd Airborne would augment the Marines. The Marines lack the sustainment and staying power of the forces from the 82nd Airborne, which might be used to relieve the Marine forces after the initial attack on the island. So a battle plan is taking shape where the Marines will land on the island, which has already been demilitarized, right? 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, Trump bombed the airfield. Trump bombed the naval dock. Trump bombed all the military assets, leaving the civilian infrastructure intact. So the amphibious assault unit will land on the island. They'll repair the military assets. That will then be the staging ground for the 82nd Airborne to begin flying in. Then you've got a runway, literally, to land on, and you can start bringing in ground forces, supplies. You can start bringing in the heavy machinery, the heavy equipment. All you need is that small and nimble attack force to take over a demilitarized island. They put it back together. Then they get relieved by the real ground force. Then that starts getting flown in, and then that becomes the base of operations. And what might be the plan there? Well, it's pretty obvious. At least this is what their thinking is, and this is what they're telegraphing. The New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, these are just a mouthpiece of the Pentagon and the intelligence community. But what they're telegraphing to the public is that this is going to be a limited tactical ground force operation. If we can't destroy their energy infrastructure, we're going to commandeer it. We're going to take control of it. So if we destroy it, it would take years to rebuild it. We could drop bombs on Karg Island and we could drop bombs on their energy. Here's the problem. They bomb our energy also. And so in the short term, again, you have this supply shock, you have this big energy crunch, but it's also a long-term problem because all that infrastructure takes years to rebuild. So bombing is out of the question. You bomb that stuff, it takes it offline for a decade, you're behind the curve already, then they retaliate, and the other stuff takes a decade to rebuild. So we definitely don't want that. Maybe the middle path, again, it's all about calibrating the strategy here. How can we escalate it in a way that increases leverage on Iran to extract concessions so that we can withdraw with honor? Well, there's a very narrow path to do that. There's not much we could do with air and naval power that we're not doing already. A ground invasion is out of the question because it's too ambitious and unpopular and maybe wouldn't even work. Energy is where we can hit them where it hurts, but it's also something that we're damned if we do, damned if we don't. If we attack their energy, they retaliate. It exacerbates the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the problems associated with that. So what if Instead of invading Iran's mainland, we invade an Iranian island. Then we don't need to send in 500,000 troops. We could send in a few thousand. Instead of calling it a nation-building ground war where they're going to be facing IEDs and IRGC and tons of stuff on the ground that will cause significant casualties, it'll be like a modern Vietnam, we could take an unfortified tiny island that's already been bombed to smithereens. At least the military resistance would be. And instead of destroying the energy infrastructure, which would take years to rebuild and would be taken offline for any regime, we can simply take control of it and form our own effective embargo. And so Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, they're able to put their energy through the strait and collect tolls. If we took control of their main energy export hub, then we would deny them the oil revenue. And we'd be able to strangle their energy sector without destroying it. And that might be the tactical victory that we need, where you can say, we achieved our victory condition. 1, we had a successful military operation. We showed off our military prowess. No one else could have achieved this. Unambiguously, we won this battle. 1, so you can't call it a defeat where, we just had all our refueling aircraft blown up and people got traumatic brain injuries at the bases. We can say, look, we did this. We killed the Ayatollah, we blew up their navy, and we took the island. So you have your honor intact. You save face. 2, it's a pain point. It's leverage. You can now increase the leverage against Iran and extract concessions. We will have to give something, but so will they. We will have to give up some concessions. Maybe we share the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe we don't get everything that we want. But with Karg Island, we also now have some cards. We can also play this game as well. And again, that goes back to, it's not only the optics of winning a tactical victory, we're also able to escalate in order to achieve an acceptable peace agreement where we don't lose deterrence and give Iran an unambiguous strategic victory. That's the second aspect of it. And then thirdly, again, we're able to do this without overcommitting. We're able to do this without a ground invasion. We don't need to topple the government. We don't need to suppress every Iranian drone and missile. We just need to hit this vulnerable point. We just need to hit that pain point, and then we're able to escalate, to de-escalate. We're able to extricate ourselves from the conflict. And it looks like maybe that's the plan. And all this other stuff is just a big show. Bombing Karg Island was to prepare the way for this. Rather than inching towards an energy war, they were preparing the way for this amphibious assault. And maybe this ultimatum was a way to get everybody to take their eyes off the ball. And to the extent that there are negotiations going on, maybe that's another mirage, just like it was in February. Because it does echo the military buildup in the Middle East prior to the start of the war. It was in January when Trump began reinforcing the military in the Middle East. That is when he began sending the aircraft carriers, the Air Force, the ground personnel. That is when he started moving personnel away from the bases. And while the military was building up and preparing for this epic fury operation, there was this ruse of negotiations, and there were ultimatums, and there were threats, and all these things were happening in the foreground, while in the background there was a military buildup. Now that the war has started, again, in the foreground you have the theater of ultimatums and symbolic strikes, and there's this debate, did the United States authorize a strike on the gas field or did they not? Well, quietly in the background, a tiny expeditionary force is moving into place. This rapid deployment airborne unit is also getting ready, and maybe the ground is being prepared for one of these limited tactical ground operations. And that's how you might seize victory from the jaws of defeat. What's more, there's been a lot of talk about expectations that a deal will be reached by April 9th, is what they say. There's a report that says the administration wants the war to wind down by that second week of April. If you look on Polymarket, there's been a lot of positions opened up in just the last 24 hours that say that a deal is going to be reached between March 31st and I think April 7th. A lot of positions. It just went from 5% to 50%. And so you wonder, is that the timeline? The next week, end of March, you're going to get this amphibious assault. Maybe that takes another week. And then that is how we bring Iran to the negotiating table. We're able to achieve the ceasefire. It doesn't drag on into the summer. They meet that timeline of about 4 weeks, which is what they initially said. And then we're able to extricate ourselves. Now, here's the thing about all of that. One, we have to see what happens. If they launch this operation on Karg Island or in the Strait of Hormuz, there's a lot of ways that could go wrong. Because these are not very big targets, and Iran has a massive coastline. It's, I think, 600 miles long. Iran's coastline with the Persian Gulf. And you know they've got positions all along the coastline where they've got drones, shoulder-mounted missiles, other missile launch platforms. So you send Marines onto Karg Island, and maybe the reason they're not worried about this is because Iran won't risk launching imprecise projectiles at their moneymaker. Is Karg Island too fragile for Iran to hit with their own projectiles? Maybe that's the thinking. But you have to expect that the Iranians have prepared for this. Did they not anticipate that the Marines might try to invade the island? Is it rigged with IEDs? Do they have a protocol in place to hit it with drones or more precise munitions? There's a lot of risks associated with this, and we don't actually know the capabilities on either side. We don't know what capabilities the United States has up its sleeve. We don't know what capabilities Iran has up its sleeve. A lot of it's confidential, and a lot of it you don't know until it happens. So we'll determine by the success of the operation if this is the right approach for the conflict. But I would say that even outside of that, if the United States seizes Karg Island, you have to anticipate that Iran is not going to readily make peace straight away. Because the United States and Israel have not fundamentally abandoned their ultimate goal, which is regime change. We talked about it this time. We talked about it last year. This is mowing the grass. We are in a rhythm here. This is not a one and done like Midnight Hammer and Rising Lion. Those were the joint Israel-U.S. operations in June of last year. We have now worked ourselves into a rhythm where we hit Iran really hard, and then Iran gets emboldened. They become more defiant, and they go back to work building missiles, drones, and maybe even enriching more uranium. And then 6 to 9 months passes. The Israelis start to freak out about how Iran has rebuilt their missiles and Iran is on a war footing and we need a preemptive strike. We do it all over again. And the question is, have Israel and the United States abandoned their designs on Iran? I think the answer is no. They still seek regime change, but they have realized they won't achieve it this time. They thought maybe they would get it. That was clear from the announcement of the war that they were seeking a regime change. They wanted it. But just like Russia and Ukraine, they underestimated Iran's ability to hang on. And so they thought Iran would collapse after the opening round of strikes. After their leader was killed, the personnel was murdered. They thought Iran would topple and collapse and the people would take to the streets and rise up. It didn't happen. It's now clear it won't happen anytime soon. Now the United States and Israel, wounded from the conflict, are looking to extricate themselves for their own benefit. Israel's getting hit with missiles. The radar and early warning systems are offline. Their Dimona nuclear complex was hit this weekend, so they're reeling. The Gulf is reeling. They're being hit by now hypersonics and more precise projectiles, drones that they don't seem to be able to shoot down all of the drones in the swarm. The United States is running out of interceptors. It's running out of these very expensive, very finite interceptors that they need to carry on this protracted conflict. And then there's the oil problem. So the United States, realizing it won't achieve its objectives, is trying to retreat tactically with honor so that we can regroup. we can move more assets into the region. We can move our people out of harm's way. We can replenish our stockpile. That's why they're asking for $200 billion in budget reconciliation for the Pentagon, so they can make more interceptors, make more stuff, accelerate that timeline in preparation for the next war, in preparation for the next time. And in the meantime, while we're allocating $200 billion, while we're replenishing our stockpile of munitions, while we're doing the things we need to do to get ready for the next conflict, at the same time, you can bet with certainty that we are on the ground in Iran building an anti-government coalition. And this is the work we hadn't done before. Now that the IRGC has been diminished and weakened, surely we are on the ground preparing the Kurds, preparing anti-government forces in Iran, maybe other secessionist elements, so that when we go in, let's say after the midterm elections, maybe a year from now, then we go in heavy again, fully replenished, ready to go, and we do it with our ground force waiting to meet us there that is going to take power from the Islamic regime. And I think that maybe is how this whole thing is going to shake out. You have to always think about the timelines. You have to think about the constraints. And the constraint facing Trump is the midterms. This oil crunch, we're not going to get back to normal, they say, at the minimum within 4 months. They say even if the war ended today, the minimum time to recover, to normalize after this price shock is in 4 months. Well, that takes us to August. And that's when all the primaries are finished, and now we're in the midterm elections. So they want to give themselves time for the economy to recover for the midterms. After that point, probably they'd be more willing to go into Iran. And the other constraint is the timeline of, again, it's the production timeline for interceptors. It's the timeline that Iran is going to rebuild their capabilities in parallel. And it matches a timeline from last year. Last year, he had Midnight Hammer and Rising Lion. That was in June. And by the end of December, Netanyahu was back pitching us on another war. By February, you had, what is the operation called now? It's like Lion Unleashed or something like that, and Epic Fury. We'll get to the midterms, we'll be on the other side of it, and then they're going to call for yet another operation. And this time it's going to be fully toppling the Iranian regime, because that is the goal at any cost for the Israelis, for the United States. And that's where we are. I think that's the current state of the conflict. That is what is being telegraphed by the government. And so we'll see how this plays out over the week. We'll see if there's any other developments in negotiations, in diplomacy. We'll see what is confirmed and denied. We'll look at how Israel seems to continue to want to attack Iranian energy. There's some unconfirmed reports of this. We're monitoring all of that. And tomorrow, I'm not going to get to it tonight because this is a whole other thing. But tomorrow I want to talk about this, and you should tune in. There seems to be an angle here with J.D. Vance. And I'm not going to spoil it, but tomorrow we're going to get into all this. The forces of evil are at work even here. And once again, I'm the only one that seems to be able to see it. We talked about it last week. David Sachs is against the war now. Joe Kent resigned from the government. Then he's interviewed by Tucker. Vance is nowhere to be seen. And now all of a sudden this weekend, you start to hear, have you seen in the papers? They say, well, Vance was quietly against the war. He's fully supportive of the president, but he was expressing his doubts silently. It's like, well, then he's not really expressing them. But you're starting to see that. Vance was always against the war. Vance thought it was a bad idea. I'll spoil it a little bit. And you know what they said this weekend? Did you hear this one? They said the Iranians want to negotiate, but they don't trust Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner because that was a negotiating team in February. And look at what that profited Iran. So, who do the Iranians want? Say the reports, the rumors, anonymous sources. The Iranians, they're willing to talk. So they say. But they don't just want to talk to Kushner and Witkoff. They don't trust them anymore. Who do they want to bring in to negotiate in Pakistan or Turkey next week? Why, our fearless vice president, of course. Our fearless vice president, J.D. Vance. Oh, really? Wow. That's really interesting because, Steve Witkoff has been dealing with the Iranians since January of last year. Steve Witkoff has been dealing with the Qataris and Hamas and Iran and Tom Barrack and Hezbollah and Syria. He's been dealing with all these parties. And Russia, he's the number one envoy, has all these relationships, has a personal relationship with Araghchi, the foreign minister of Iran. He's been there from the beginning. This is his file. All of a sudden, they say, oh, well, the Iranians, they want to talk, but they won't talk to just anybody, not these bubble-blowing, goofy goober babies, Steve Witkoff. Now they want to bring in J.D. Vance. So are you telling me that next week J.D. Vance is going to broker the ceasefire to end the war? Because that would be something. That would be the mother of all psyops. In comes our fearless vice president, J.D. Vance, to end World War III. They wouldn't talk to Witkoff. They wouldn't talk to Kushner. They would only talk to Vance. And so maybe that's going to be the photo op, is J.D. Vance in Turkey, in Pakistan, with the speaker of Iran's parliament, shaking hands, making the deal. And then he's going to be everywhere. I ended the war. And this is how he's going to outflank little Marco. Because, see, they don't want to talk to little Marco. The top 25 Wall Street donors, they want Marco to be the nominee in 2028. The donors want to start donating to Rubio for 28. They've chosen him over Vance. The Iranians don't want little Marco. They want Vance. Interesting. And you know who else hailed the diplomacy efforts today on Twitter? Take a wild guess. So obviously the diplomacy is bullshit. Bullshit. The Iranians are saying they want reparations. They're saying they want the United States to abandon our bases in the Middle East. And Trump is saying, well, they've agreed to give up nuclear enrichment. Who's hailing these bullshit negotiations as legit and commending Trump for them? Why, Joe Kent, of course. Joe Kent. Amazing. So wait a second. So wait just a minute. On Tuesday, Joe Kent said, I cannot, in good conscience, send young men and women to die in Iran like Israel made us do in Iraq, so I have to resign. That was on Tuesday. On Thursday, you're telling me these negotiations came together, and now on Monday, Joe Kent says, thank you, Mr. President. We must always pursue peace. I believe in diplomacy. So what happened in the past week then? On Tuesday, it was a fever pitch. It was a crisis. You had to step down because this is a quagmire and there's no way out and we're all going to die. On Monday, now you're hailing these efforts, and who's going to lead them? Your buddy J.D. Vance. And we're all going to buy that, and people will. And people will. Spoiler alert, people will. The cattle, the goyim, are going to eat it up. Now, this is a conspiracy theory. This is a conspiracy theory. All of these forces are at work right now. Israel's at work. Vance and his team are at work. Forces are at work. And it remains to be seen who will win out here. I think that is something they're trying to do, though. Whether they succeed or not, I guess time will tell. But they're definitely trying to do that. And I think that's going to be the goal. How do we turn a negative to a positive for Vance? How do we prevent this from being the liability that torpedoes his presidential ambitions? Well, we'll make him the negotiator. We'll make him the peacemaker. The peace president. And all of you Israel-critical goyim are going to eat it up. You're going to say, Joe Kent is based. Tucker is based. J.D. Vance, their best friend, ended the war. You're going to fall for it. Like you did with Trump. And that's why you see that piece in the Times that says, well, Vance said he didn't like the war. He supports the president, but he didn't like the war. Something is going on. Something is going on in the White House. Mark my words. Something is going on in the White House. It is a proxy war in our own government between organized Jewry behind Rubio and the J.D. Vance team, the J.D. Vance entity, the entity known as J.D. Vance, SRP 44, 49, whatever, 48, SCP 48, the entity known as J.D. Vance, and that whole Borg-like entity, they're trying to salvage his candidacy, save him from organized Jewry behind Rubio, and they're going to try to save the day in Iran. And ultimately, here's the next shoe to drop. The next shoe to drop is that Netanyahu is going to be facing an election in Israel. And so maybe they want Netanyahu to lose the election and to be out of the picture, so we don't restart Iran, and Vance saves the day and finds peace and everything, and maybe that's the goal. Anyway, but we'll cover that more extensively, I think, tomorrow, if nothing else happens. But that's that. We're going to move on. We're going to take a look at our super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say about all that. This is all speculative, we're in the fog of war. How's the beard coming in? What do you think? All right. Well, we're going to move on. I get distracted when I mire. I'm miring. I'm Myron Gaines. We're going to get on to the super chats. We'll see what you guys have to say. But what do we think about? Is the beard coming in nice? Should we keep it? Get rid of it? Some people love the beard. Some people love it. Some people they can't get enough of it. They just can't get enough of it. They just want to get all up in it. Some of these bitches and niggas, mostly no niggas. These niggas love the beard. Niggas love the beard. Groypets love the beard. All right, anyway, we're going to take a look at the super chats. Let's see, pause. Let's see what you guys have to say.
Trump with the bluff. And it's getting to the point where it's hard to get a read on what's going on in this situation. Like Nick at the end of the show speculated to some degree, the play and how he's presenting that play that at the end of the show with J.D. Vance now being able to go over there and that being the way that J.D. Vance can save his legacy, where a lot of the people who are backing, let's say Trump, a lot of the neocons and probably a lot of the big business folk, they probably feel that they can control Marco Rubio better than they can control J.D. Vance, and that J.D. Vance is just not as much of a guarantee when it comes to getting involved in wars overseas, which may be big business, right? For gun manufacturers, whatever else, war brings a lot of interest when it comes to people with money, because even look at what's happening right now with Donald Trump. A lot of people believing that he's manipulating the market. Wealthy people who understand money know that you don't make money when things are just consistently going up or things are consistently going down or things are just here. You make money during times of chaos when you know something is coming and can anticipate that, whether it's the market crashing, whether the market's soaring, it doesn't matter. The change is what allows people to make money in a fast period. So we don't know if this is what's going on when it comes to Trump. Going back to what Nick speculated as far as his conspiracy theory on it is that, you got Joe Kent now, and I didn't see Joe Kent supporting this and saying that, he's behind what Trump is doing right now. I'm assuming based on Trump coming out after his 48-hour 48 hours if you don't open up the strait. And then the entire time, the strait is open. It's just not open for America and Israel. That's what it seems to be based on the information that I'm hearing. The country, or maybe the countries that obviously may be allies of America, but for a lot of the other countries that depend on, that oil, it seems to be that Iran is perfectly open and willing to like have conversations with them to ensure that safe passage along the strait. So we don't know what's going on. Donald Trump comes out here and it's almost like it makes you wonder so many things because we understand his personality. His personality, he does care what a lot of people think about him. However, he probably cares about money more, right? Because he probably feels confident enough, and we've demonstrated this perhaps, or we've added into him thinking this about himself, which is anything that he does, people are going to be on board with it. Like a lot of the plan trusters that Nick is always calling out. So here we have Donald Trump, and he's saying you have 48 hours, it's after the market closes, or we're getting ready to now attack your power bases, which according to the war crimes, right? Wouldn't that be considered a war crime? That's civilian infrastructure. So if that's the case, so Donald Trump, makes this 48-hour threat, warning, whatever it is, to Iran, and Iran plays it, from my knowledge, exactly how they've been playing this entire situation. Look, we don't want this altercation. It goes back to that 50 Cent clip. I should really play that 50 Cent clip during one of these times where I'm talking about this. When 50 Cent says, look, I don't go looking for problems, but when problems find me, I say, okay, no problem. Like that seems to be what Iran is standing on. Like, yo, we don't want to be the aggressor. We don't want to have a war with y'all in the first place. However, what we stand on and will always stand on is that this is our country. We're a sovereign nation, and you can't come in and just dictate terms of what's going on in our country and how we interact, how we do business, regardless of how that impacts your economy. This is our country. So they've been willing to stand on that. What has been their energy? You hear the foreign minister in a lot of the interviews where he'll just sit there and say, like, yeah, we're not asking for, ceasefire. What would be the point of that? That's kind of to the point where Nick was anticipating the conspiracy theory as far as why would we negotiate with Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner when the previous two negotiations that we had with them led us to get bombed, led us to be struck. So therefore now we'll bring in JD Vance, not Marco Rubio, right? Not Marco Rubio, but we'll bring in JD Vance, and JD Vance can save his career, save his legacy, and put him in a position where he doesn't completely just ruin any chances that he had of being the 2028 Republican nominee. So Donald Trump makes that threat. Iran just sits back and, the same energy. I think Iran came out. I was listening to some, they call them semi-official news outlets. And I think it was called like METZ or something like that, MEHTZ. I may be completely wrong, and semi-official means that it's not completely aligned with the government, but it kind of is. And I believe that that's more so aligned with the supreme leader, this particular organization that I'm talking about that put out the news that they spoke to the foreign minister, and the foreign minister said, we haven't spoken to anybody with Trump, in America. And that's consistent with what Trump said, because when Trump was asked, he's like, yeah, we spoke to somebody who's supposed to be the most respected leader there. And they're like, and then all the news folk, journalists, they're like, well, did you speak? You talking about the supreme leader? He's like, oh, nah. We don't know. Like, we haven't heard, we don't even know if he's alive. Like, we haven't spoken to the son, the new one. So Trump seemed to be confused, and he got a little irritated with some follow-up questions regarding who they're speaking to. But Trump, comes out, as Nick said, 7 a.m. right before the markets open. And it seems like this is what he's doing. He's trying to not look like a sucker, not make America look like a sucker, not admit defeat, not admit that they didn't get enough done or that they underestimated Iran, so they couldn't achieve everything that they wanted to achieve. He still wants to walk away with the rest of the world looking at us like we are still those guys that they looked at us perhaps maybe before this conflict. And while it's been going on, a lot of people may be questioning that. So Trump is trying to get all these things done while at the same time being able to manipulate the market in his best interest. Now, what his best interest means, I don't know. Is this something that he's trying to do privately with, his little small group of people that he works with, or certain people where he can make certain deals with? Or is he trying to do it to the point where it's just like, hey, I just don't want this thing to get out of control and me looking crazy because, with all the uncertainty with what may happen in this war, obviously that's going to impact the markets. So we don't know. We don't know. We still don't know why we're even still there. Like, we still don't even know why we're still there. Based on all the information that has come out, based on Joe Kent coming out saying certain things, based on Tulsi Gabbard giving her statements in Congress, which you can clearly tell, like, yeah, I'm not putting my name on this. Like, Donald Trump is the only person that can decide whether or not something's an imminent threat. Based on listening to Ben Shapiro's show, it was painful. We reviewed a few minutes of it, and he was talking to Batia. But if you hear the conversation, it's like, all you got to do is listen to Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin, Lindsey Graham, Randy Fine for maybe 30 seconds about this particular issue. Maybe Palestine, Israel-Palestine as well, or maybe Israel-Lebanon as well, or whatever eight fronts of this war that Israel is fighting that you want to focus on. But just listening to those people for 30 seconds, I think it becomes very clear of what's the humane side of this, what's the godly side of this, and what's the demonic side that just wants to accomplish whatever it is their agenda is. They don't care, have no regard for human life, at least brown human life, especially if you're a Muslim. And they don't care. They just want to accomplish whatever it is. They are aligned with this greater Israel project. That's what is most important for them. And they will get to it by any means necessary. Ben Shapiro tried to say, well, maybe it's one of those things where we just weaken Iran. We weaken Iran, and then we'll take it over later. Like, that's the energy. And this is what needs to be addressed on a spiritual level, and maybe other aspects of life as well, where we just have this mindset that we can take other people's stuff. We have a mindset that war is okay, that death, that killing is okay, and it's simply not. We have a mindset to where we believe in or live a life based on perhaps government laws that shape our understanding of what our spiritual laws are, or what our spiritual interpretations of certain things are. And it's always going to lead us in this position. Once we accept that, hey, death is okay and rationalized based on these things, then all the people that run the world need to do is figure out how they can fit, whatever situation into one of those categories to where it's rationalized and the people will get behind it. This is one of the greatest examples of this. And it's perhaps even a greater example of it than with Iraq, because with Iraq, I believe more Americans were on board with it. When it comes to Iran, like, the majority of people, besides Trump, decided to just get on board with something that he campaigned against the entire time that he was running for president. And really over the before he even got in politics, the last 20, 30 years, he's been saying a lot of this stuff. So we had Trump and his team, MAGA, America First, Republicans, conservatives, whatever you want to describe, people that were rocking with that, saying like, yeah, we don't need to get involved with a war in Iran because that's not America First, outside of the neoconservatives, right? And then you had the Democrats and the liberals, them aligned with, hey, why are we getting involved with, war in Iran? Now, we always have to give the context, because a lot of times we'll act like they both have different goals and different agendas. They're both Democrats and Republicans, in my opinion. They're just playing different sides of the story. The end result is going to be what the end result is, based on the people in power lobbying and putting money in a lot of those people's pockets, leveraging whatever it is that they have from the political standpoint with the politicians, and getting them to achieve whatever it is that they want their end goal to be. That's just how it works. So with that being said, they would have gone about it in different ways. We got to remind ourselves that Biden and Kamala Harris never even asked for a ceasefire. Here they're the party that's supposed to be standing up for the Palestinians against, the genocide. They never even asked for a ceasefire. So we realize that certain people's agendas are going to be executed even if there's a lot of resistance from Americans, we the people. They still are trying to push this war, still are trying to push all the reasons to why we need to engage in this war. And it's just the support is just not there. But what it seems like they're banking on is enough of them poking, and then Iran makes a mistake and gets out there. And they've been saying like Iran launched like this long missile that wasn't verified to my understanding. But a lot of people are trying to say like that's Iran, showing that they can come close or hit European countries or whatever. We know that eventually something's going to happen, whether it's the drone in California that they were saying now is going to be an attack of Iran, whatever it is, we know that they're going to be able to find some sort of reason to why we should engage in further combat. That's what it seems like. If Iran slipped up before and maybe did something to where the rest of the world can't see what's going on, where Iran is truly on the defense, then we probably would have already put boots on the ground. But Iran is doing a good job of making the things that they're doing make sense. And it started with when they initially had their nuclear facility bombed last year. And they retaliated in a very pragmatic, caring way, if you want to put it that way. Because what did they do? They called up Trump and said, hey, we're going to hit this base where there's no Americans on it. We're going to strike with the same amount of strikes that you all made on the nuclear facility. We just have to respond. You got to understand that. We were in the middle of negotiations. Y'all decided to strike us. We got to show some sort of action back. Boom. Now, fast forward. Trump makes this demand, 48 hours to open the strait, or else we're going to start bombing your civilian infrastructure, your power plants. So what does Iran do? They say, oh, yeah, well, we'll start bombing the power structures, civilian infrastructure of your allies in the region. We'll shut this whole thing down. They said that they'll start, and the one that I wasn't as familiar with, I heard this term with, there was a journalist or a teacher, the professor, Mamandi, I believe he was on Piers Morgan, where he was talking, they were having a conversation about hold on, let me get the right word. It's when they remove the salt out of the water, desalination plants. So they said they'll attack the desalination plants. Those are the plants that obviously take the salt out the water and make them okay for drinking water. So Iran has this leverage when it comes to escalation in this regard. And that's what Nick was talking about. Like, if you think that you can escalate things to make it uncomfortable for this region and to make it uncomfortable for us, we will make it uncomfortable for everybody in this region. And we have the power to do so. We have the ammo to do so. And you already know we have the energy to do so. So move accordingly. And it seems like they called Trump's bluff. Seems like they called America's bluff. Now, it is interesting that he gave another 5 days. Is this going to be something where Friday after the market, when it closes, Trump's going to announce that, hey, we did a surprise attack, or we're getting ready to, obviously he'll let us know after, but maybe Saturday morning we'll wake up and, late at night, Friday into Saturday, there was a surprise attack on Carg Island where our Marines went in there, and who knows what's going to happen then? Who knows what's going to happen then? We don't know if it's going to go that way, if it's going to go away where Trump just allows J.D. Vance or somebody else to go in and properly negotiate this thing. We don't know. We know there's a lot of pressure from, let's say, some of our allies, right? There's a lot of pressure from Israel. I don't know if there's a lot of pressure from some of our allies, but there's a lot of pressure from Israel. So we don't know if that's going to influence the decisions that are being made. It kind of would be foolish to think that it wouldn't, because thus far it seems like it has. And they've dictated a lot of the things, like striking in the first place, to where, Marco Rubio came out and said, hey, they struck, so therefore we had to respond. Or we didn't have to respond. We just had to strike with them, because that way we already knew that Iran was going to respond. Y'all know the logic. We don't even have to say it. But it's going to be interesting to see how all this stuff plays out, and for all of us to pay attention to the market. And this is not what Trump got elected for, bro. You were supposed to stabilize things, lower inflation. Now it's like every single action that you're doing, you're rolling the dice and betting with our lives and our livelihood, with the lives of our troops, the lives of our soldiers, and with our livelihood and quality of life in America. That's what it seems like. And beyond that, all this action that we're putting out, all these demonic things that we're putting out, eventually that's going to come back home. We'd be fools, naive, to think that we can visit all of this terror upon other countries, other nations, and for it to never even impact us. Oh, well, that was just our military that did that. That's not us civilians. They would never strike us. I know we strike their civilians and their civilian infrastructure, but, they would never do that to us. I know that we, attacked or sent a missile into a girls' school, but they would never do that to us. They couldn't do it to us. Well, they can't until they can. And I hope that it doesn't take that type of wake-up call for all of us to realize that we need to bring about some changes. So the ball's in our court, the ball's in Trump's court, and we need to make sure that we're applying as much pressure as possible to make sure that we're pushing our politicians and leaders to not engage in something that could end up turning into, if it's not already that, but World War III. So nobody can afford an energy war. Nobody wants that. We, the people, don't want that. But this is the concept that I wish that more of us will get behind. We just have to. War is just not the answer. I know that may sound corny. I know that may sound, more of a dream out, not necessarily reality. But that's the only answer to all this. So if that's the only answer to all this, hey, we just can't ever justify killing each other to accomplish government goals. If we don't stand on that, we know the people in power are never going to stand on it. And they're going to continue to breathe this type of energy through us that just moves us into a more demonic place. So what are y'all thoughts? Y'all let me know what y'all thoughts are. I'm going to wrap it up here. Let me know where my blind spots may be playing a role. My blind spots, or my bias, may be creating some blind spots, and how that may be playing a role in my perspective on this situation. So y'all let me know what y'all think. Do me a favor, like, subscribe. Appreciate y'all as always, especially those that stick around to hear until I start saying this stuff, because that means you got to check out my thoughts on it. So appreciate it. Like, subscribe, turn your notifications on. Word to Big Bro Robert, who always reminds us we control our own algorithm. We don't let the algorithm control us. And on that note, I'll see you on the next video. TB, GI, it's the black guy in the corner, but they'd rather see a nigga on the corner. They say I'm stealing Nick's clips like I'm stealing Nick's chick, not knowing that I hit him first week for the lick. I said, Nick, I could post here while you post there. Let's run the ads up, then let's meet up over there. Let's figure out a split that's honorable and fair. Tell me where you trying to take it. Bro, I'll meet you there. 1600 Penn, Wash, DC. Swear I saw the vision riding through the DMV. I envision prayers, but I could do VP. Hillbilly, Elegy, fuck, I look like JD. Shout out my cheat code, Dave and Karen raised me. And my big bro, a nuclear family. And they don't like that. Strong fathers in the crib, BLM fought that. LBJ society created all that. Victimhood mentality, I can't embrace that. And everything they taught in school, assume it's all cap. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Everything I said I'd be, I am that. Ain't no introduction, just some fun facts. In case you were wondering, I am that. I know you heard me hit it 3 times for Dr. Umar. Shout out to Umar, man. We ain't kicking nobody when they down. And shout out to everybody that continues to show love, support, appreciating the message that I'm giving y'all, along with the bro Nick's message. We gonna keep pushing, man. And shout out to the haters too, cause y'all in the comments heavy too. y'all the ones that gave me the inspiration to create this song. They kept saying like, who's the random black guy in the corner? I am.